Right, so here's a couple of tips for those of you. Close that window, close that, pause, and that's okay. So, here's a tip that may make your working with meshes a lot easier, particularly with complex structures, clothing in particular. So this skirt has got these pleats or plaits or whatever you want to call them, and they're a pain to edit. So they're a pain to edit. So if you wanted to make the swirly bits, the flutes or whatever they're called, these bits. So if you wanted to edit the convex elements, so the top of the arches, you'd have to go around the mesh and select each one each time you wanted to modify them, like so, which can obviously be annoyingly repetitive and frustrating. So annoying and frustrating, or repetitive and frustrating. But what you can do is use your vertex groups. So in Object Data Properties, what we can do is assign these particular vertexes to a group that's just for editing. I haven't exported this yet, so I don't know if we have to remove these, but that by the by. What that means, so let's make this a bit easier to see. So we wanted to select those vertexes, so select none. So parts of the mesh have already been assigned to a vertex group, and we can use these vertex groups to make selections or selective selections in edit mode that makes selecting these elements that we want to select. Let's see how many times we can say that. Select. It makes it easier to make those selections, because what we can do is once we've got them assigned to a vertex group, so we select the vertices that we want as a group and we assign them to a vertex group, and then what we can do, select the vertex group, click the select button, and it's selected the vertexes. We can deselect them. Same with the pleats on the is that concave? That's convex. That's the convex peak, and that's the concave trough. Don't know what they're called with clothing, but we can select those too. And what that allows us to do is select them. Whoops. Why is that not doing that? Edit mode. It should be. Should be able to select those and manipulate them, but for some reason not letting me do it. That is totally weird. But what it'll do, Not quite sure what it's doing there. It should allow you to manipulate and select the group. That's really weird. I don't know why it's doing that. Don't have. I don't have anything locked. That's really weird. Blender does some really weird stuff sometimes, and there's no particular reason for it to do what it does. It just does it and decides to do something, probably because you pressed the wrong key somewhere. That's really bizarre. Why is it not letting me do that? Oh, there we go. Oh, it was on our individual origins, wasn't it? Yeah. Dagnabbit. Master pressed the shortcut key, one of the many that have been changed in Blender 2.8, which makes this immensely frustrating to use sometimes. But that's beside the point. Anyway, so yes, you can use your vertex groups. You can set up some vertex groups, and that will allow you to just quickly select the bits that you want. And that's particularly useful for these types of clothing items. What was that one? Oh, that's the belt. So we've got a belt section because, and the reason for doing all of this is, aside from all the editing, the reason for doing all of this is because if you use a single texture, so you've mapped your entire object to a single image, so that's the UV map for this at the moment before doing some more editing. What this allows you to do is just quickly and easily select the parts that are separated or that you want to be separate elements of a UV map. So we want the belt. Let's say we want the belt. And what we can do is, using the vertex group that we've got set up, select the belt, and we've instantly got the UV map for the belt selected, and we can start editing that. So you're not wasting time constantly having to do multiple selections to select all the bits that you need. So that's a tip. Use your vertex groups. So select your vertices that you want to be part of a group and add them to a group, and then you can just use them to select the elements that you want. Whoops. So I'll continue with what I was doing, which is editing. Whoops. UV editing. And you can do that with all sorts of parts of the, particularly with these types of products that are quite complicated shapes. And it just makes editing them so much easier. So if you imagine that this is a shirt with foofy sleeves and foofy frilly trims, so you can have a right foofy and a left foofy and a base foofy, and each of those would have their own vertex group for selection, which makes the whole process of making foofy or foofy, well, flouncy clothing much easier. So there's a valuable tip that you won't learn from anywhere else. So aren't you glad that you were watching this? Oops, that's gone a bit wonky. So invert the selection. So for example, let's do, so we're going to create a vertex group, rename this skirt. So I'm going to include this top section that's selected, and then the main skirt itself So an easy way to do this, because we want to select everything, so what we can do is deselect that, select the belt loop, invert the selection, that selects the entire skirt, and then we can assign that to the skirt vertex group. So if we deselect that, so there's nothing selected, so we can select the belt, deselect it. Let's just switch into, so we can select the belt, deselect, select the skirt, that selects that. And what we also want to do is create a group for the belt loops. So select all of those, which is this section of the UV map. Create a new group, assign, and we can rename this underscore belt loop. So there's nothing special about the uppercase, lowercase, and the underscore. It's just to distinguish these as editing groups versus skeletal mesh deformation. What's it called? Armature controlled groups. So belt loop, so assign, so we can deselect those now. So we can select the whole skirt. Do that again. Whole skirt. Just the belt loops. So we're getting the corresponding UV sections for the selections. And it means that we don't have to keep, as was said earlier, it means you don't have to keep doing the whole manual selection thing, which can be very repetitive and boring. So that's belt loops. So they're upside down. And it also should mean that even though we have the belt loops included with the skirt, what we can do is select the belt loop vertex group and deselect just those elements. So we can select the whole thing. We want to deselect the belt. We want to deselect belt loop. So all we've got left is the skirt. Is that loop selected? We need to add that to the skirt. Deselect, select, deselect. So that's the top. Oops. So, what was I going to do with this? I've got to do... Whoops. Let's see if that works. Change the pivot point back to median point. So we could map each of these belt loops individually, but they use up quite a bit of space. We do that because we need to put a belt buckle in this. So that'll do for now. So we've got this space available. So if the belt buckle only occupies this section, you might be able to shrink the belt loops down and just place them in this space that we've got left. We'll have to see. So save this, save as. So simple belt buckle. Cursor reset. So it's now down at grid center. Pause when we add the object. Just a cube. Excuse me, just a cube. It'll always pop up wherever the cursor is. So you don't want to click somewhere off in the distance and place the cursor out in the void somewhere and think that you haven't added an object to the scene. What's the best way to do this? Just insert, extrude, get rid of that face. Doesn't need to be complicated. Get rid of that. So let's add loop cuts. So that was just the Control R shortcut keys because the tool functions in a, oops, that's the edge slide, as edge loop cut. This behaves in a slightly different way. And depending on whether you've loaded in the clothing starter file as is, normally with Blender 2.82 at least anyway, there's a set of properties that appears in a toolbar that runs along the top of this 3D view. But if you load in the starter file, it'll not appear for some reason because Blender is not recognizing the old settings properly. So it gives those precedents over the project as you're working on it, so the tools don't work the same way. So you have to reset the view. You have to reset your project when you load it in. So that doesn't need to be too super complicated. Let's pull that section out. Make an adjustment to the belt loops. And that's all that's needed, really. Assign a material, or assign the same one that we've been using. So there is no material on this object right now. It's blank because it's a brand new object. And we don't need the back face because you can't get that close to it when the item is being used. Where's the torso? So you can't really see it. So there's no point in adding that. So you can remove it. So the object has no material because it's a new object. So material properties, skirt, and it'll auto assign the image that's associated with the material, but we now need to UV map it. I need to make that a bit thicker. So that's the UV map that it had by default because it's a cube. That's the default cube UV map. So we just need to redo that, so we can just UV, where's the unwrap? There it is, unwrap, and we get this shape, which is fine. I wonder if let's pin these. So what we're going to do is pin these corner vertexes. These are the UV vertices. We've got pixel snap enabled, so we're essentially using the texture, the pixels of the texture, so these little squares. With pixel snap enabled, these act as a grid. So this is a tiny grid, and we can get the UVs to use those as a snap point. So where is it? UV snap to pixels. So we've got corner, and we can use that as an informal grid that we can snap pixels to. But pin these, see what happens. Pin. So pinning vertexes means that once they get highlighted with this little red marker, they won't move from their spot, so you can pin them, fix their location, and then redo the map. So same again. So the shortcut for that is P. P. So ordinarily you wouldn't necessarily need to do this, but if your object, whatever it is, clothing item, if it's going to be derivable, you have a decision to make as to whether you want your UV map to be as easy to derive as possible. So the easiest thing to derive is basically a square. So that's the belt buckle, it's a square, easy to derive, but you do get a little bit of distortion, so you have to weigh up whether you want to allow for that or not. Oh, it's not those ones. Which ones is it? Are it? Which ones is it? Not those. Not those. Oh, so we're on the wrong side. So flip that on the X. There we go. Whoops. So, with your UV maps. Oh, hey Gav. Long time no see. Thank you very much. So you've got a decision to make with the UV map, whether you allow for or compensate for straightening up the UV map to make it easier to texture. The problem with that is, although it makes the UV map easier to texture, it does mean that the texture distorts on the object. So you have to decide whether you want to formalize the UV map and distort the texture on the object, as we're doing here, or whether you want to distort the UV map and essentially formalize the texture on the object, so you straighten out all these wonky bits. Because you have to make allowance for the fact that people might put text on things like this. So someone might write their name on the front of here, presuming there was enough space to do that, or they might put some frilly design on there. That the burrito was very nice, thank you very much. So you have to decide whether you want to accommodate derivers being able to do that. But it does mean that the artist is going to have to, or the person deriving, person deriving is going to have to spend a little bit more time and energy. So we've got that side straightened out, but that side's still distorted. So that means that the UV map is going to be a bit more complicated to texture or create a texture for. Versus its appearance on the mesh. Oh, did you make the Did you make that? So Gaff is saying that he made an accessory mesh attached to the hand. Nice. Let's see if I can pull that up. Are we in IMVU? Whoops. Oh, we can start talking about IMVU Studio soon. Burrito, so dress up. Let's just remove the toilet roll for now. Recently added. There's a burrito. Ha! Very nice. Yep. Awesome. Yeah, they don't have to be. I mean, this is the thing. People make them. IMVU Studios. Oh yes, IMVU Studio. Won't talk about it too much in this stream because I'm going to go over it in a couple of other streams. Going to do some because it's quite interesting what they're doing. Because we can now include things like normal maps and specular maps. And for those that don't know what those are, it's basically a couple of textures that make surfaces look bumpy, textured, so you can see the grain in fabric. Yes, I'm going to do some streams on making how to make simple bump maps, or normal maps as they're actually called, normal maps and specular, or shiny as it's called in Studio. But that allows us to create more interesting products because, for instance, you can add fabric. You can add the fabric texture itself. So the cloth, the grain of cloth, the weave. You can add that as a normal map, and it'll come through and be visible. And then, of course, you've got the shiny stuff. So all the PVC lovers will just be going mad with that, because it allows you to add what ordinarily people do is they paint the shiny highlights onto things like PVC or plastic or glass or anything. But with shiny maps, you can actually just add a map and it will automatically make everything shiny. So we'll take a look at Studio in a couple of streams coming up. I'm going to do my best to do some more frequent streams, and they'll often be just hangouts, basically. It won't necessarily be tutorials, but IMVU, the new Studio, we'll take a look at that. Yes, so they did a Twitch stream showing someone with a jacket with specular and normal maps, and it looks pretty good. So we'll take a look at Studio at one of the coming streams. Where was I? UV maps. So that's what you'll have to do with UV maps is take into consideration whether you want to allow for people to write text on them. Yeah, it'll be. I mean, Studio's. It's going to be interesting. It's not. It is backward compatible in the sense that you can open old projects into it and edit them. But as it's still beta, it's not clear yet how new products made with Studio that include normal and specular maps, how they will work in the legacy client. So the client that we're all using at the moment, it's not clear how those are going to work. So obviously it's early days still, but we'll see what. Actually, let's do a little quick sneak peek. So let me just save this before I forget. Save as, and we'll go back to that in a second. Before. So this is IMVU Studio. Oh, dagnabbit. I'll just do that off screen just to make sure I'm not doing anything I shouldn't be doing. Yeah, so this is Studio. So all of this is still kind of up in the air in terms of this initial page that we see. Apparently there are some plans to, if as a creator, if you're familiar with your the creator dashboard, it's not clear yet whether some of that creator dashboard information is going to appear on this page. But so this is Studio. at the moment it's listing all the products that you've been working on and all the products you've got in your catalog. But to create, you just click on this giant button in the right hand side. It'll give you a ton of options now. So if you want to derive from a specific type of item rather than just the defaults, which is what most creators use, it'll show all the available products that are derivable, that you can derive from. And you just select it. Let's select this one. It'll show a preview, which is really cool. So that's the preview of the top. And then you just click derive. Oh, and it's showing you the derivation history as well, so that's useful. So if you select that item, you'll at least know where it's come from. So let's derive that. So if you're familiar with Photoshop, it kind of looks a little bit like that, the way that they've got it laid out. So that's the top. This is the 3D view, obviously. And then they've got, the way that they've got this worked out is that they've essentially separated the product out into a set of core components. So you've got all your materials, which are everything to do with the assets, the components themselves. So all the stuff that's actually on this product or being used by this product are listed on this side. So to edit them, you select one and all the properties appear on this side. So all the elements that are contained within the product are on the right, and the individual properties of a specific element here, sorry, that's on the left, appear on the right, and you can edit them. So we've got materials, meshes. So if you had a complex room or complex furniture item, or even a complex clothing item that had multiple meshes, all the meshes would be listed down this side. And it's the same for actions as well. So if this were an animated or included an animated pose, they'd all be listed. And then you'd select your individual component that you want to modify. And as you can see, the settings are updating on the right hand side. So you select your component, edit the settings and the properties. So we've got all sorts of panels now where we can drag and drop things. I mean, I'm still working through this myself, but then we've got all the different more advanced properties. The alpha is going to be interesting, but most of the other stuff that we're used to is already currently available. So it's the stuff that's been added just relates to the added features that they've got with things like normal maps. So that's our normal map and our shininess map. I don't have anything to hand at the moment to test that, but so yeah, that's just a quick look at it. Yeah, there's a lot. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's more complicated. It's just that essentially what they've done is obviously added more features to it. And with those features have come a few additional settings, which make the thing look, shiny and new. So that's it's going to be interesting. So that's IMVU Studio. That's a quick look at Studio. And it's available if you go to let's see if I can drop the just got to find the because it's kind of hidden. Right, so this is yeah, so that's the forum where you can get some help and stuff. That's where you can download it as well. But it's worth checking out, just poking around with it. I'm working on something, just a simple scene, so that we've got an object that we can go over it properly with. Because there's the normal maps and the shininess or specular maps are going to be interesting to work with, but they do need to be set up properly in order for them to work as expected. But yeah, so that's Studio. So once I've got this simple room sorted out with normal maps and specular maps, we'll load that up into Studio and go through the process of importing it as an FBX and setting up the textures. Right, so let's close that and we'll look at that more on a specifically on a dedicated day. Right, so back to UV maps. Tra-la-la. So we're going to create a group for this. Sign, double check. So when we join that to the main mesh, so select them both, we've now got buckle. So we can use that to select that element, and that element only. Need to smooth it. So that's a whacking great big buckle. So we now need to fit that to the UV map. So with something like this as well, what you could do to increase texture resolution or the amount of texture space that you're using, what you could do with something like this is split it into sections. So those two sections are the sides, and these two sections are the top and bottom. But what you could do with this is flip the sections, drop them on top of one another, and for something like a gold belt buckle, whoops, where you are essentially using a repetitive texture, you could drop all of the sections on top of one another, and within the context of a larger object, we can use more texture space without actually using up more UV map space. So the belt buckle that we had was occupying that much space, and it was about that thick from the point of view of the UV map. But what we've done by splitting it up, we've increased the amount of texture space that's being used without necessarily using up more of the texture map. And it's the same principle for the belt buckles, not the belt buckles, the belt loops. So these sections, so they're upside down. So depending on how much detail you wanted on these parts relative to the skirt, you can break them all up and drop them on top of one another. So let's just undo all of that, because I want all of that to be part of the same map. So, as we were saying before then, it looks like we might have the space to do this. Make sure these are all facing the right way, again, because we want to make sure that if someone were to put some pattern or design on this, that their pattern and design isn't flipped. So we're flipping the UV maps face the right way. So belt loops, we want to select all of those. And then so we've got 3 left. Let's see if we can get these. A bit tight. I want to try and avoid doing this too much. So that's the belt loops. So that, whoops, that's the UV map for the skirt. So we've got the main body of the skirt, we've got the belt section, we've got the belt loops, and then we've got the belt buckle. That is that UV mapped. So that's some interesting tips for today. So the vertex groups. So if you do use vertex selection groups for edit mode, why is that control? That's control for a reason. I can't remember what that one was for. So we've got pleat outer. Oh, vertexes. We've got pleat outer, which selects the apex of the convex shape of the pleat. So these points, which means that we can select those and adjust that element depending on how pleaty, how folded we want the pleat to look. Deselect, got pleats inner, same sort of thing. Deselect, and we've got the belt. So that selects just the belt area. Got the entire skirt section, including the belt loops. Got belt loops on their own. And then we've got the belt buckle. And as mentioned, this also then means that we can use these to deselect elements or reselect depending on what it is that we're doing, which is useful for the UV mapping element. So it's only selecting the bits of the UV maps that we need. So there we go. That's a couple of tips for UV mapping. This. Whoops, that's the wrong one. So that's our mesh. So in the next stream, although this has been weight painted, I might go over some of that. So weight painting might be in the next stream. But just published, I should say, a new tutorial on making a skirt. So if you want to watch that or look at that, source files are also available. Right, so yes, next stream we'll go over some weight painting so that we get the mesh to articulate properly with the skeleton. So we'll do that in the next stream. So let me just save this. Save as number 5. That's quite nice actually. Right, so we'll call it quits there. So what is that, an hour? An hour and 10 minutes. Yes, well, we don't have the fortune of having physique or skinning in Blender, so it has to be done manually. So you people that use 3D Studio Max are very lucky, very fortunate to be able to have the physiquing or the skinning set up for you. So you can more or less drag and drop or copy paste, or use the original files, skinning files, to weight your meshes to the avatar. We don't have that in Blender, so it has to be done manually, which is a pain in the behind, to say the least. Right, so we'll take a look at that in the next stream, and hopefully I'm going to start doing more streams, particularly with IMVU Studio coming up now. So I'll be taking a look at that. Yes, yeah, you weight paint, export, test, see all the deformation, all the clipping, back into Blender, weight paint, adjust. So yeah, it's a pain. Right, so we'll call it quits there, and look forward to the next stream. And yeah, so adieu, as they say in, I won't say the name of the country I was just about to say, because they're not in our good graces right at the very moment. Anyway, so we shall speak to you anon. Bye for now, everyone. Oh, and thanks for lurking, lurkers, and thanks for chatting, Gaff. See you in the next stream.